straight away. I'm going to get my commission. This is engagement of
Buenos días. Oh. No te preocupes, yo manejo bien. Buenos días.
Good morning.
Good morning to everyone. Oscar. We are still missing our third panelist. But I think that in the interest of time, we better start. I think that you know that this session has simultaneous translation, and it's going to be run in 3 different languages. Okay. Feel free also when you take the floor to use whatever of the 3 languages suits you more. Okay. My name, by the way, is Frances Pedro. I'm the director of the UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel. This is going to work in a very, I hope, in a very smooth manner. Okay. First of all, we are going to have one representative. I'm going to introduce him in detail later on. We're going to have one representative of a very active government in the area of international cooperation in higher education. Okay? And we're going to take his presentation as an example of how a country that is really committed to internationalization looks at international cooperation. Okay? So he will be starting his presentation, and then afterwards I will be engaging in a dialogue with the president of the International Association of Universities, who will be sharing with us her thoughts about the current status of international cooperation seen from the perspective of universities. Okay? I'm going to engage in a dialogue with her and inviting as well the representative of Argentina to take the floor. And then the idea is to engage in a discussion with all of you. Okay? So feel free to take the floor. I'm going to take 3 questions in a row. Okay? Then just could be questions, could be comments, could be your own experiences when it comes to internationalization, your dreams, the challenges you are facing. It doesn't matter if you are in a government or in an institution or in a network of universities, okay? So the idea would be that by the end of this session, we leave the country, we leave the session, we leave the room, with some kind of optimism, right, about the possibilities of international cooperation in the future, okay? If it would be even better if we could leave the room, with some practical suggestions based on your own experiences, okay? Without further ado, if the third panelist comes, I will be inviting him. If not, we are going to proceed with that. Okay, good. Let me then, I'm going to switch now to Spanish. Okay? Okay. Es un placer para mí.
It's a great pleasure for me to present you Professor Oscar Alpa, who was invited to participate in this panel in these moments as a representative of the government of Argentina, where he is, I believe, not Undersecretary, so sorry. We internationally say Vice Minister, in a case exclusively dedicated to higher education policy. But, moreover, Professor Alpa also has a past, as we all do, and in this very recent past, he was a rector of a university. And for these reasons, this is a person who's very familiar with both institutional and governmental perspectives. And before he goes on with his presentation on how he sees, from the standpoint of the Argentine government, the processes of international cooperation, I'd like to say something to you that seems to me very important. For the whole Latin American and Caribbean region, Argentina represents the first choice of place of study for foreign students who wish to study in a country in that region. More than 80% of foreign students who go to some Latin American or Caribbean country, in fact, end up in an Argentine university. And this, I think, indirectly at least, speaks to the quality perceived in Argentine universities by the international population, at least for the Spanish-speaking part of the world. But I think it also speaks to a series of political policies which governments have designed so as to support this international process and facilitate it. So let's take the example of Argentina, and I'm sure here in the room there will be representatives of other countries, and we'll be able to hear their experiences as well with great pleasure. But let's start by saying what the focus of this government is. Oscar, you have the floor. Can I speak from here? You can hear me from here. That's lovely. Very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much, Francesc, for giving me this possibility of commenting, as you were saying, on the Argentine experience from a Latin American standpoint. Thank you for sharing this as well. I think what we can do is to kick off this conference with this subject that is an important one. And for that reason, I'd like very rapidly to make presentation, and then you could have some questions and we could have some exchange. And I think that you've already heard that I'm representing the Minister of Education, would also like to have been here but was not able to be. So I will be able to present the vision that, just as you were saying, Francesc, we have in Argentina. Now, it's clear that there is a great degree of receptiveness, but I think we see that the situation is inequitable all the same. When we look especially at financial and economic situations of the different people concerned, I don't think you can say that we're as inclusive as we could be. I think we have about 50% of people going abroad compared to the number who come to Argentina, and that, I think, is fairly eloquent. It's also, I think, very important in this presentation to think about international cooperation, both South-South cooperation and North-South-South cooperation. And I think this is something we need to make progress on regionally. I think we also need to think about this in the longer term, based on a more integrated form of internationalization. I think when we look at the basis of the Sustainable Development Goals and then our regional conference on higher education, which took place for Central and Latin America in Cordoba in 2018, and our whole conception, if you will, with this idea of inclusion that we wanted to put forth, solidarity and cooperation. And this is part of our Argentine and Latin American, Central American way of thinking of higher education as a public good, a universal human right, and something that I think people tend to think about at the very outset, because this is the vision on the basis of which one may observe this whole idea of internationalization. Over and above that, I think we need to see democratization of knowledge. I think we all would agree that this is a social good, a collective strategic good, which is essential so as to guarantee basic human rights. If we consider that this human right to higher education is a basis to be able to guarantee all other basic human rights, which are absolutely basic and cannot be eradicated. Now, if we think about our regional conference on higher education for Latin America and the Caribbean in 2018, we have here a position which I think has been set out saying that states must guarantee a high-quality, inclusive education, which is equitable in nature, so as to bring about social and economic change. And in the CELAC, which Argentina ECLAC, which Argentina is presently leading, this is also one of our priorities for sustainable growth. And I think this also leads us to put forth some innovative proposals along these lines, focusing on inclusion, transformation of the educational sector, equity, and what we could call basically a post-pandemic context. Now, for this reason, I think we need to have a look at internationalization within this postulate, this idea of guaranteeing inclusive, equitable, high-quality education. And I think we need to see what are the skills that will allow regions, countries, citizens to be able to act in these complex scenarios and adapt themselves to new world dynamics based on knowledge. We're seeing changes in our educational systems and our institutions, which need to think of cooperation. I'm convinced of this, to build a solidarity in the creation and acquisition of knowledge, and this has to happen interregionally as well. Now, I think the framework for the Latin American and Caribbean region in this internationalization should be interinstitutional cooperation. And this interinstitutional cooperation needs to be based, firstly, and this is why we're talking about solidarity and cooperation. Here we're talking solidarity between peers and having a promotion of basic intercultural dialogue, not just in Latin America and Central America, but I think throughout the world, respecting the idiosyncrasies and identities of the countries which participate, encouraging the creation of inter-university networks, and strengthening national capacities and cooperation between institutions so that you can have this at both regional and international level. And I think here we need to strengthen this idea that internationalization is a basis for work, but fundamentally what we need to recognize are these national capacities, abilities. And very often there is a contradiction. We see that we don't have internationalization, we have some form of globalization which causes regions to lose their skills and abilities, and which answer global imperatives and lose sight of the needs of the communities and societies within each region. So I think that this, as I said earlier, will encourage the circulation and appropriation of knowledge as a strategic and social good. And I think this can be based in this last point of our Sustainable Development Goals, number 17, which is an alliance to meet the goals. And here we have to be clear on what these goals are. And for this reason, I think we need to think of alliances and to bring together these associations to make them inclusive internationally and regionally, nationally and locally. And on these principles and values, we can have shared objectives and values which are centered on persons and on the planet. And within those goals, Sustainable Development Goals. So I think this is something of fundamental importance, so as to be able to build knowledge, to develop science and technology, to develop peoples and nations, and finally to be able to solve the most serious global problems we face. And in this context, our SDG 17, I think this form of development is fundamental for our alliance to meet our goals and the 16 preceding goals as well. And so for this reason, we've been saying that internationalization with solidarity based on cooperation between institutions and based on solidarity and mutual respect, cultural diversity. We've already said how important we have a culture of peace and understanding between cultures. And I don't need to repeat this again and again, but the idea of being able to live together and work in local communities and in the world. Having interaction internationally, but with a regional or local basis. We aren't globalizing concepts from other concepts. Rather, we are taking advantage of the things which are important for intercultural matters, to be aware of the realities of the whole world in each of its regions. And for this reason, we also need to work in academic networks. We need exchanges. We can use television, university networks, shared research projects, different programs for academic mobility, double degrees. We've also been commenting on this in other meetings. When we talk about academic mobility, we see in Central America, here I'm getting a bit ahead of myself perhaps, but Latin America in general, these programs for academic mobility have a very low percentage. In Argentina, I don't think we even reach 1% of mobility. And this is globalized, if you will, and I think that we will need to look at the economic reasons for this. Another subject of basic importance is to have recognition of degrees, because if we have internationalization of students, but once they graduate, there are enormous barriers, obstacles, and we need to eliminate these so that we can have exchanges of students and of teachers, but also once they graduate, they confront enormous obstacles so as to be able to work in countries which receive students warmly, but graduates not so much. And these people are often then obliged to get graduate degrees, master's degrees in another place so that these can be valid and recognized in the place where they wish to be. So this idea of recognition of degrees, we have a concrete basis already today, which is quality accreditation on the basis of the different certifying bodies who attest to quality in the world. We are now having different accreditation policies, and I think that is a concrete basis for degrees which people have to be certified as to their quality by the corresponding bodies and then have direct recognition of these. Let me go a bit faster now. On mobility, as we were saying here, I think the problem that we see, particularly in Latin America and in Argentina, also in Central America, is that we have an elite-forming phenomenon. It's the elite that exchanges. There isn't a very large number of exchanges. Given the percentage I told you, it's hard to imagine this being a massive flow of exchanges. And a consequence of this, as we were just saying earlier, is that these advantages we have for institutional management have to do with funding, and often there are scholarships or other forms of support, but these are quite limited, and they generally end up being topped off by family financing, and here again, we end up talking about an elite phenomenon in this context as well. The pandemic, obviously, we need to think rapidly about what that means. This has caused us to come against these weak points with even greater force, and that's been hard to have a physical exchange of students in this time. And then another couple of points which arise here. Some programs that were planned. The first was the first at-home internationalization, not simply talking about exchange, but universities in their own premises. And then the same thing thought out as a form of internationalization of the curriculum, not just mobility, but also to think out the curriculum from the standpoint of what it is based on and how international it is. And then the last thing, which is not just about the curriculum, but also research and other relations, to see universities become more international and not simply have an issue of mobility, stricto sensu. So within this, we need to think about inclusiveness and internationalization. Very rapidly here, the pandemic has shown us that in Argentina, for instance, 64% of the physical mobility that was supposed to be brought about was impossible and turned into virtual mobility. Courses happened over the platforms we know about. People remained in the country. And so this was obviously caused by the pandemic, but it did allow this idea of the cost corresponding to physical mobility to be eliminated. And so we understand then how an opportunity which is more or less unique, but which can go on existing after the pandemic and allow us to continue thinking about when we wish to have an integral form of internationalization, whether we shouldn't move toward virtual inclusive internationalization, whether this, given all the costs that are necessary for people to travel, to live in another place. I'm not saying we're going to totally replace mobility, physical mobility, but this is one thing we will have to have a good look at, to observe, and to think whether this couldn't be part of a strategy for future virtual mobility. So by way of conclusion, these tools, and this is basically a definition of inclusive internationalization and quality within universities, how we can go forward with a new generation of strategies which will allow all students to be able to experience this international dimension, as we were saying, as a basic part of their education in this integral internationalization. That was my introduction. Thanks very much. What I'd like to bring out here before we go on to our dialogue would be a few points that seem to me very striking in your presentation. I think I'll just bring out four. And I think we could have a critical reading of some of these. First of all, I'd like to bring out the emphasis that you placed on this framework for internationalization with a model for commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. You put it in a much broader agenda. And I think this is very interesting, the reference that we're making presently to the culture for peace, at least in our part of the world, where we are right now. I think that's something especially important. Then a second idea, which I think is already in the air these days, the extent to which internationalization, to the extent it has to do with mobility of students in particular, does not remain reserved to an elite and the process of elite formation that you referred to. And I think that even though internationalization and mobility are part of institutions' agenda, we also need to recognize facts. You cited a figure for the whole region saying that mobility affects 1.2% of students. And so when we look at the world level, summing together all regions, we maybe reach 2% of all students. So we're talking about a very important process from the standpoint of countries and universities, but very unfortunately, it is still subject to an elite formation process. Then, thirdly, you opened a window on the future of virtual mobility. Isn't that right? Also bringing out the risks that this could involve, but also correctly stating this is an opportunity. And then finally, I think that without specifically referring to that one issue, in your comments, there was reference made to the availability of resources. And in cases like that of Argentina, where families need to contribute to these processes. So I think there are many, many other ideas as well, but it seemed to me that these were the ones I especially wanted to bring out. And now, if you'll allow me, I'll go back to speaking English.
English? Okay. It is really my pleasure to welcome our second panelist today, Professor Pam Fredman. Professor Fredman comes from Sweden. And I don't know, maybe the first question would be, would you introduce yourself as a say, university rector or as a scientist? Because I think that...
If you asked 15 years back, I would say I was a scientist. Okay. If you ask today, I would say I will be a rector or the leadership of academics.
Exactly. Because I mean, Professor Fredman has an impressive CV in terms of as a researcher. I mean, she's has been for a number of years professor of neurochemistry. Okay, which is already a field, you know, of extremely complex, at least for me. And then she moved into several leadership positions at her own university, the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. And then, I need to mention that she's also member of a number of scientific and scholarly academies like the European Society of Neurochemistry and the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences, just as an example. No? If I'm saying this, it is because you are not only bringing the perspective into this discussion of a university leader, which you are. As a matter of fact, she's here because she is the current president of the International Association of Universities, probably the leading, no doubt about this, the leading international association of universities worldwide, and I have to say an extremely useful and trustable partner of UNESCO, at least of our institute. Okay, so I think that, as I was saying, Professor Fredman is bringing here the perspective of a well-known university leader that has important international responsibilities, but at the same time, we have to benefit from the fact that she's also a very renowned scientist. So I think that bringing the two perspectives would be really useful in this conversation. Now, instead of asking her to make a presentation, I suggested a couple of questions on which I would like very much Professor Fredman, Pam, if you allow me, to elaborate. Sure. The first one is a very simple one. I mean, it's simple to ask the question, then it's complex to respond. The first one is about, seen from your perspective, from this double perspective of being a scientist and a university leader, how would you assess the current status of international cooperation in higher education? What would be your views?
Yeah. I'm happy to be here and discuss the internationalization, and I very much appreciate what you said, and I have to repeat because I was very happy to hear your voicing the quality, the inclusiveness and equity, and also the solidarity and the needs of sharing knowledge all around the world, because I would like to start there. So from my perspectives, I think We very often talk about research as one part of internationalization and education as another part. But in my point of view, it is important that we do have research and educations in all parts of the world, even though not all universities are research intensive, but we have to bring this together. This is knowledge development. So what I see now is the research that is not institutional driven and to not a large extent. It's driven by the researchers themselves. They find their colleagues and who they want to work with, and they are also driven, of course, with the funding agencies putting up money in a certain area. And unfortunately, and that you also brought that is that this is focused on the STEM area, on the technology, on science, and very little on humanities and social science and arts, which are necessary if we are going to reach the goals. It's also driven by excellence. So they want to work with researchers being on the top level, having high H index and so on, and very little to be there to take in other knowledge from different parts of the world. You talked about the North-South, and I think this we have to keep in mind, because there is a lot of knowledge also in other institutions, in other countries, even though they are not ranked or have the H index, they are there and we have to recognize that. So that's a concern, I think, and it has not been growing better during the crisis we have now, because what we do see is that less funding for programs with aid money. And this is an international concern, because US and the European countries, they are cutting down the money and they use them in their own country. And that would have a severe long-term effect. So when it comes to the education, you brought up the importance of inclusiveness, and I think that for the future, we need to stop to see international education and mobility as a commercial income. And we saw that during the COVID, because those depending on this money have larger problems than those not being depending on this. And we have to see that the purpose, and you also brought up that, why do we have the internationalization? It's to take from different disciplinary education, but also we have to see it is a cultural exchange, it is the intercultural learning and understanding, and it's also a disciplinary broadness. And for me and for the IAU, we have talked a lot about this. If we want to reach a sustainable future, and that's beyond 2030, we are not finished 2030, we need to have that part of understanding. And universities have always been based on international cooperation and international learning. So I'm worried about the commodification of education, and I hope that we can work much more, and I therefore like to see what kind of quality, and that doesn't have to do mobility all the time, but the quality driven, and to have the intercultural learning perspective is important. And I don't think that's not what I do. Most students just go abroad and they come back and they have very little intercultural learning during that stay. So that's my view on the current status of international cooperation.
As a follow-up question, Pam, I know that we didn't talk about this, but I cannot resist the temptation of having a follow-up question. How do you see the world of international cooperation in higher education after the pandemic? I mean, do you think that opportunities are going to be increasing over time, or you think that rather governments will be spending less and supporting less? How do you see, I mean, remember that when we were talking at the beginning, we said we are so happy to see each other, face to face, because last time it was more than 2 years ago. Okay, how do you see now the landscape of international cooperation evolving after the pandemic?
I would be happy if I could say that I would see the government supporting this very much. Too much of national thinking, and we need the competence here, and we need to develop, and we need the money here. I think that bringing you from the governments here, and I hope that there are more people from the governments, the higher education institutions cannot develop these themselves. We have to have support. And there is a responsibility for the higher education sector to bring the awareness and make understanding of the relevance of international cooperation. Because if you go to companies, big international companies, they scream, we want to have more international people working. What do they do for that? Almost nothing. So the governments has to support this. And I'm not seeing that. And what I said before, when they are reducing the aid money within a month, this is not a good sign for this international cooperation because it cuts in developing countries in particular. So, yeah, I'm a little bit concerned. And I'm also concerned that governments continues to count number of international students coming and number of international students staying and going abroad instead of seeing what is the value of this. And maybe that's something we have to work with when we're rethinking internationalization, that we can have the understanding of the values of international cooperation instead of just counting numbers.
Exactly. I think that we all got a very clear message coming from you in this first question about the dangers of commodification of internationalization, and you were very clear about that. And seen from the perspective of UNESCO, we couldn't agree more with you on the needs of having a value-based approach to international cooperation. I think that, Oscar already made a reference to, the commitment of governments, and I think that, as you said, universities, because of their very nature, are already committed to a certain value system, and among those values, we have cooperation. So I think that was a very clear message I heard. Now, let me move to the second question that we agreed to develop, Pam, and it's more, now you have been elaborating on the challenges of international cooperation. Now, how could we address those challenges from your perspective? I mean, what does the International Association of Universities think about, ways in which we could foster international cooperation, particularly in the current context?
Yeah. If I go back to the values of this, I would say that International Association of Universities has always been working on internationalization and cooperation. I mean, that's why it was formed 1950, to bring the higher education institutions together as a community and promote the higher education. So I would say that there has been more of discussions on cooperation and how to work together, and also bringing awareness of the situation in different parts of the world during the pandemic, because we have never been to so many different webinars, and IAU has actually, I think it's almost every second week, we have organized a webinar discussing this. And I think that is important, because there is not one quick solution to this. We have diversities in different regions, within different institutions. So we can learn from each other, and we can discuss, and we can share best practice of this. So I think that that's something that IEU should continue, and I would say that the more members we have from different types of institutions and organizations, and also different parts of the world, the stronger the voice will become, and the stronger we can support the work that UNESCO is doing to promote this. So I really encourage, and I used to say, maybe it's embarrassing to say, but very often when sitting at the university leadership, you have an international office and they decide a lot of things besides the rector, but then it comes to the end. Now we are going to, we have this and this money, and we have to select what to do. And in most cases, what is the added value for us? IEU and the type of issues we're talking about here is not what's in it for me. it is what's in it for promoting higher education. Because if we are not going together, we will have problems all over the world for higher education. And I see, and I've been happy to work with IU for many years, and it is in my heart to see that we do collaborate, that we do see the diversity. So for the future, I think that we can do a lot by just learning from each other. So other things that maybe it's not what IU can do, but we can promote that, and that is long-term financing. I mean, there's too much project-based financing. 1 or 2 years, we can't even start the program before the students should stop, or the research programs is. So if we can work with that, because that is connected to the values of quality, to inclusiveness, and also to equity. We cannot do this in 1-2 year project basis. So long-term financing, I think that that's something that we together can promote. And then we have to exclude the commercial grants. And I think that we have discussed rethinking of internationalization even before the pandemic, but the pandemic showed really the consequences. But we discussed that even before, because we are living in a world we shouldn't travel too much, and there are new technology that could be developed. That said, we are happy to, as you said, we are happy to be here. We are human beings, and I talked to a colleague here and said, we are human beings. We need the social context, so we should not forget about the values of that, and in particular maybe for the young people, if they never meet, if they never share different views. I think that that will be a drawback for a long time or for decades. And then the final thing I planned to say was higher education cannot do it ourselves. So if we as an organization and if we as a part of the sector could get more involvement and understanding from the governments and from policymakers, this is needed. And I think that we have to make it understandable, because this is not a cost for any country. This is an investment for the countries. And even though some students go abroad and they never come back, the value of this, if they come back, and also the value of having students coming to another country and maybe stay there, it's a value for sustainable development and understanding, and hopefully a better peace and democracy development than we are seeing right now.
Thank you very much, Pam. I think that I couldn't agree more with these last words in particular. So thank you very much for these contributions. What I would probably highlight here is a couple of things. One is your own commitment, which I think reflects the commitment of the International Association of Universities with this value-based approach to international cooperation. So implicitly, the message is, if you work in a university which is still not a member of the International Association of Universities, please, when the session ends, go and see either Pam Fredman or any other colleague, okay? I mean, I'm saying that simply because I take for granted that you come from a member state of UNESCO, so you are already, part of our party, if I say.
May I make a reflection to that? And that is, as you said, I have been working in the leadership of the university for many years, and I was the rector for 11 years at the university with a lot of international cooperation and all this. Now, looking back, I would have been a better rector. I should have done a better work if I knew what I know now about international cooperation, about the diversity of higher education around the world. So this is a message from me as a former rector, that the leadership is also depending on that I have the global views and I have the diversity and the understanding of what's going on. That's a message. I regret I didn't know all things as a rector.
Point taken. Okay, now the beauty of this kind of session is that just having only two panelists that are very committed to timekeeping is that now we can engage in an open dialogue. So I'm going to go back to here so I can see you better. Now the floor is open. You can take, exactly. I will take some, I'm sorry, yes, before I go into that, Oscar, please, go ahead.
Yes.
We shift to Spanish, right?
Claro, español. Me gustaría 2 o 3
Claro,
temas,
adelante.
digamos, de lo que justamente se habló.
Well, I'd like to take up some of the points made. We agree a lot on the non-commercialization of higher education. And we'll highlight this because nowadays there are a lot of higher education offerings that do not highlight the possibility of travel rather than the educational component. So that's something we're against. We need to think of education, of research and education and the integration of both, and also back and forth with the community and with society. It's important to highlight that, because that's something we agree on and we need to continue to address here at this conference and into the future. Solidarity among countries and in society leads us to see higher education as a social good, as a public good. On another point that you raised, regarding what's been happening globally, not necessarily in Argentina. The reduction of state support. I mean, number one is having cooperation among states. If states cooperate, then there will be support for universities. The European Commission made it clear, the European Union made it clear. I mean, they wanted cooperation and the funding was created. Now that funding is no longer there because there has been a sort of retrenchment. But the idea is that, well, the idea that universities definitely need to integrate and globalize and go international and so forth. But, I mean, we need the states, we need states to cooperate. We need a South-South state cooperation, and then we'll be able to do that at the university level. So if states are willing, then university cooperation will be the main tool for it, and the funding will be made available. And then, I mean, we all agree that this is an investment rather than a cost and an expenditure. But the fact is that universities set their budget for internationalization and then make the necessary investment. But the first step is to identify what the university wants to be, what part of that mission they want to be international, and then make the budget on that basis. Usually in our budgetary exercises, we just work on the basis of the previous year's exercise, or maybe we cut down or we cut back because we have a mandate to cut back for some reason, but we don't really devise our university policy based on what we want to do in internationalization, but based on what funding is available for it. So it's important to be clear about the vision and mission of each university, and internationalization has to be seen as a cross-reaching approach. And of course, states need to be committed to this. But really our mission, the university's mission, needs to be there. And of course, it has to be tied in with our goal of higher education. Pam?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree to that. And then coming back to the organization of universities, internationalization is part of what universities are doing. As long as we put that in offices which are not giving the possibility to work together with the people at the universities, within research and within in education, then we will not have the development, as you say, that internationalization is really part of all what we are doing. So bring the people from the international offices into the core operation of the universities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pam. Now, I really appreciated this discussion among you. Now, let me go back to you. And once again, it is now the time for you to either raise questions to the panelists, express your own perspectives, share your experiences. It is an opportunity also if you have any practical insight, something that you would like that is taken as a key message that you would like to give in terms of promoting international cooperation in higher education, please do, okay? I'm going to be careful about the time because I've seen already some hands raised. So just in case, I'm going to take 3 now and then a second round, okay? Please raise your hands again. I see 1, 2, 3, okay, 4. I take 4 and then the second round, okay? First, because I know some of the people, you can speak in English, Spanish, or French. Okay. Okay. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Rui Offerman.
Sorry, the interpreters are unable to interpret unless people use their microphone.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. It's for the translation, otherwise.
Yes, okay. I'm here as part of the Latin American and Caribbean space for higher education. And we have produced a document that we have presented to UNESCO concerning the 11 themes of the conference. But my view of this international cooperation to enhance synergies is that this is although it's very close to international mobility, but it's a different thing in our view. International cooperation to enhance synergies has a lot to do with how can we enhance the SDGs on a perspective, an international perspective. And SDGs is part of the main concern of this conference. So we represent Latin America, Caribbean, but we also represent other southern or parts of the world. And SDGs are very crucial to our areas. And in the past, listening to Oscar and to Pam, and I thank you for your presentation, we think that there has been a very straightforward South-North cooperation. And it's time to revert that, or to create new venues for that. And to create new venues has a lot to do with enhanced synergies. So one point that we have to remember here is that there are a lot of universities, of research institutes in our countries, in our areas, that are ready to cooperate with different parts of the world, even with the Europe and Anglo-Saxon countries, in terms of producing projects, introducing new policies, aiming at the SDGs. More than ever, SDGs are crucial to the planet. And a lot of the problems that we have today are coming from our region, unfortunately. I'll mention the climate thing, I'll mention the water quality, I'll mention the poverty, hunger, and all that. So it's time for us, and this would be the suggestion, Francis, yes, for us, to suggest or to propose that if we want to build up cooperation to enhance synergies, this should be done with the identification of institutions that can cooperate both in the south-south direction as well as the south-north direction. I agree with Pam that research has a lot to do with the researcher and not with the institutions. But financing research is an institution problem. So if we want to cooperate, to enhance synergy, we have to look for international funding for this cooperation. And I think UNESCO has a very central role in trying to promote this financing with different sorts of origins and resources. So to us, we have the ability, we have the structure, We have research universities of high quality that can cooperate to enhance synergies with other parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Message taken. I'm going to refer at the end of the session about some UNESCO proposals when it comes to that, okay? But now I prefer that we focus on the interaction. So when it comes to you, if you don't mind, let's take 2 or 3 comments, and then I will give you the opportunity to react. Is that okay? Good. I think, yes, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Roberto Escalante, and I speak now with 2 hats, if I can say so.
Yeah, sure.
Because I am the Secretary General of the Association of Latin American and Caribbean Universities. I am also Vice President of IEU. I think in the last 40 years, we have had international cooperation very highly. I mean, from the start of multilateralism, I think international cooperation or international relationships, I mean, took over, I mean, quite strongly. The results have not been the best, in my view, because they have widened, I mean, the gap between the South and the North. So what I would like to say here is that we need really a new agenda, I mean, for international cooperation, and a new way of really interacting between those that are in the North and those that are in the South. We are not listening to each other as we should, in my view. And if we want to, if we believe that international cooperation can enhance synergies, we have to talk about what synergies we are talking about. And that is the key issue. And because the differences in terms of needs and terms of priorities, in terms of research, for instance, in terms of social and economic and political problems, the synergies that we need to, as I said, to enhance are different in the South and different in the North. So that, I think, that is a key point that we have to point out, to say, okay, more international cooperation. What for? For whom? That's the best, the question that we have to raise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We still have 2 more to go. One was here and the other behind you. Yes, please. Here, second row.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. My name is Luz Gamarra Caballero. I'm from Peru, but I am also part of the IESALC team from the Higher Education International Institution from UNESCO. My question was related to international cooperation, but focus on social science. I mean, because in Latin America, and I am going to tell you like an experience in Peru, the international cooperation helped to develop more social science instead that the public government or the higher education institution by themselves. So I would like to ask you that what best practice or what are your comments about how can we enhance that these synergies, these international aids could help that develop more social science, more humanities at the same level as we do or international universities do in STEAM, no? To recover that weight and to have this balance, this equilibrium. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one, in this first round, yeah, just behind her.
Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Walter.
Hi, my name. I come from the province of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and I'd have a question for you. When we're talking about students and 80% of mobility and people participating in these programs in Argentina, if that refers to extra-regional mobility or if that includes mobility within the region, this wasn't clear to me. And then secondly, I understand that this is basically a question for Pam, but on the subject of mobility, what is the view from the north? Not so much as we were saying before. I share what the colleagues had to say about that, the need to say it shouldn't just be mobility as such, subjects of internationalization, but also to know what is the outlook, what is the view about participation from people outside the region, from the north, looking at relations with universities in the south, in our region, or in other regions or areas, because what we see, obviously, there is this elite formation that Oscar was talking about, and this very small percentage of students from our countries who can really be mobile and study or participate in activities outside of our region. However, when we look at this small percentage, it's higher than the participation of what we call receptive mobility, people coming the other way. And how does the North see all of this? Thanks very much.
If you don't need to, but if you want to react to any of the comments made or provide your own perspective, feel free. Pam, would you like to start maybe? Yes.
I would like to react on all of them. Coming to the SDGs, even though we didn't mention that, I think that the Agenda 2030 is the driving force and the SDGs. And the message to the governments, 193 countries have ratified the Agenda 2030, so there is a responsibility. And to that, I would like to add what IAU has been doing, because IAU has been working with higher education for sustainable development since the 90s or maybe even before. And in the response to the Agenda 2030, we formed a cluster, a global cluster of universities for all of the SDGs. I would like to make, and you can go to the website and look at this. So there is a champion university for each SDG, and they have networks of other universities, and they are situated all around the world. And I think that is bringing together and looking for synergies, which has a focus on the SDGs. Roberto, you asked for the new agenda for international cooperation and for whom. And I think that I'm coming back to, if we are going to develop those, it's the long-term financing of different projects that we need to have if that is going to work. And that connects to the social science, because I want to mention an example from my former university. And that is a program which started, I think it's now more than 30 years back, with a lot of aid money from SIDA from the beginning, but there is also World Bank and so on. And that was from the environmental economy in social science, who started that to start to work together with countries or universities in Africa. They are in Latin America, and they are also in some parts of Asia today. During all these years, they have had the programs going on education. There has been PhD educations, and many of those being educated coming from the developing countries, they are now in political positions, and they are acting as at faculties of the universities. Again, 30 years, and it's still working, and it's a very good program. So that's coming back. And then students, you have to answer. I don't know where they come from. But what do the northern countries say about mobility? I'm sorry to say that we have less students going from the northern countries to south or to anywhere else. They have been going to China. That is not the case very much anymore. One reason one says is that the economy, many young people in the Nordic countries and in the Northern Europe, they have been traveling, so they get international experience in other ways. But there are good programs, I would say. We have the Erasmus Plus and so on, but also where you see that institutions works together between the North and South and have a long-standing program. And I know about those long-standing programs which has been running for also decades, and that is in medicine and that is in nursing, where they see the need of going abroad and learn other things. And then we have students coming from the north and goes out. So that, and again, I think it's the institutional cooperation and having programs where the students are sent out. It's not on their own, they're not doing it themselves, it's within the program. And we can develop that, and from both sides and from different countries. So
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pam. Oscar, ¿quieres añadir tus comentarios?
Let me just add 2 comments, if I may. I think, first of all, we had this original presentation at the beginning, which was talking about the relationship between synergies and these relationships and how to use these. And then we also said that it would be necessary for us to be able to see how in higher education, and I'm speaking here as the rector of a university, we would be able, first of all, to have a look at our budget and how that would have to do with our gender perspective, and then how we could also make sure that each institution of higher learning would have a way concretely of working on the basis of their resources and on the basis of the work that they had to do. And I think that we're quite far from being where we need to be, but I think these are good indicators. And this also, I think, is a good way of us to be able to state clearly what resources we have between our universities, and particularly what could be earmarked for internationalization. I think we originally had this idea in SDG 17 when we were talking about our relations with each other, but I think it's very important for us to deal with all of our goals in this way. I think also then we were talking about something that was very important in my presentation. I thought this integral internationalization, where universities say what goals they have, what they need to do, and then to have this back and forth with society, to be able to see what's going on, to civilize the situation. I think this is of fundamental importance, and it also allows us to have this integration which we sometimes see where each university is working alone in its own corner, and we haven't enough discussion to really bring about the integration we want to have. I can also go back to what was said about Peru, or by Peru. I think this is true, but I think what all of the engineering, we could call it, in our relationship with the North, but at a regional level in Latin America, I think that most of the exchanges are happening in social science. And what we could talk about within the Americas, and certainly within Argentina, because that's something that I know about, most of the exchanges, including the ones that go with the Rectors' Conference and other mechanisms that exist, the majority of exchanges are happening in social science, humanities, law, education. Within Latin America, that's what's happening, social science. And I think that what you're talking about is more visible in South-North relations. I don't know what precise experience you have with this, but it's true that from my standpoint, there is a lot of exchange, a lot of mobility, a lot of research as well at international level in social sciences. And I think what we're talking about here is, in my perception, practically balanced. But it is true that when we have this internationalization between countries, south-north, with, let's say, Germany or Spain, here technology plays a predominant role in the fields of study and in this internationalization. I think that more concretely, we saw this in what we were talking about yesterday as well, between Germany and Argentina. We were making progress in social sciences so as to not find ourselves in the situation with the 4 areas that you mentioned. Thanks very much. And I'll go on speaking Spanish, I think, to answer the question that was asked. Just 30%, or a bit more than 30% of students from Latin America who decide to go on with their studies in a foreign country stay in the region. So basically a third of Latin American students remain in other countries of the region. And of that third who remain, about 80% will stay in Argentine university, will study in Argentine percentage, a bit more perhaps. And how can we explain this? Well, there are a lot of different hypotheses, but in any case, that is the reality we see. Now, we know these figures because our public institution did a study before the pandemic. What might happen now is something we don't know yet.
To English, because the first round has been somehow monopolized by representatives and participants from Latin America, and that's welcome. And you still are welcome to take the floor, of course. Yes, please. But I would like to open up the discussion to colleagues. I see colleagues coming from Africa, colleagues coming from Asia and the Pacific as well. Any chance that you want to take the floor as well? Yes, yes, I say, okay. I'll take 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, good. Sorry, and you are pending, sorry, you are the first one. Okay, so I'll take 5 in this second round. Please. You can speak in English, Spanish, or French. Do not hesitate, but I would like very much to invite colleagues from Asia, Africa to take the floor, and Europe as well. Yes, please.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Good morning. I'm Jose Cordoba, and I come from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and I work with our university council. I would like to take advantage of this conversation, first of all, to express my solidarity and support with our Argentine colleagues when they're making these decisions about internationalization. However, I think that there's something we could add like this, that it's important to say that in Latin America and Caribbean and in the whole world, in fact, that we need to give a bit more of a kickstart to synergies and to build them where they do not yet exist. With, for instance, suggestion for the African Council for Higher Education, where this type of event and internationalization happens internally, given a budget for ideas and without more formalization of the process than that. And in the process of internationalization, we find most of the time problems with recognition of degrees and other diplomas. And this is my experience, but there is a protocol for recognition between different countries. However, and here I think we see that there is a need that we have in the university sector and more generally a problem that has to be solved. When we look at university education in general, this is a process which continues, which grows with ever more students registered in universities. And this already started in the last century, and in Venezuela, progressively, the number of university students is increasing in spite of the pandemic. And so we are covering 100% of the secondary education in our country with public resources, with our budget, and this is a problem with our participatory democracy we have in democracy in Venezuela, where all rights are respected, and we're aware that this is a basic human right, this is a shared public good, and so there is pressure from above, and we have to find a way out. When we talk about mobility, for whatever reason that takes place, for the segment of the population, it's important to find synergies, and I would encourage the experts who deal with Latin America and the Caribbean to see how it's possible to create a sort of academy which could deal productively with our region in this way. And here I think what we see is something that could be very important. We could bring this together and try to see how these synergies could be created and how we could work together to that end.
I think that your call for this, ratification process of the regional and global conventions for the recognition of higher education diplomas is well taken. As a matter of fact, when it comes to my own region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we are only missing one more country for this regional convention to enter into force. Okay, but the global convention needs also some more countries to enter the process of ratification. I mean, we hope that this is going to happen sometime this year. Okay, so thank you very much. The call is taken. Now I'm going to move to a participant from Central Asia, just to change the mood. Okay, please feel free. Oh, wait a minute. There is a micro.
My name is Gusein Bagirov. I am from Azerbaijan, Western Caspian University, which is located on western coast of Caspian Sea, Baku. And we are not in Central Asia, we are in Caucasus.
Oh, sorry.
And formally, actually, we are most southeastern corner of Europe, geographically. But we can account as a south country. We are not north, clearly. And we were established with a group of fellows in 1990 and had ups and downs in our international contacts. We are very good partners from United States, UK, Ireland, Germany. With some of them, we continue having working together in many projects. And we had downs, like just as a case, I want to bring it to be clear for what I will say next. One of the largest in our country project based on analysis of genetics of population, to find origin and to find what was migrations from this region. Our partners were from Norway, Denmark, Copenhagen University Institute of Genetics, and it's until now largest project. But in the end, we supported this project by ourselves. I don't know who was sponsors our partners, but from our side, we used the resources of university. And in the end, we had to wait for 3-4 years to get shared results of information. Why I'm saying so? So it is not, let's say, just to stress such partners. Idea is that not everything should come from up to down. From governments, I will talk now, from sponsors, international organizations, all of them very good. I'm pro all ideas which were lauded here. But most effective way to make it irreversible, international cooperation, to enhance synergies, to make universities, students, researchers closer to each other, to exchange experiences, to support each other. It should come from down, from universities. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it will be very difficult. Sometimes you can feel lack of resources. But just fight corruption, be transparent, be honest with your students, with staff, with your partners. And gradually things will go for better. And best way for university to me, an example of our university, which, as I said, is located in a quite complex region, is to rely to own resources, energy and passion, and to work based on own dreams. Open for others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take a third, and then in a second round, I will take the other two pending, okay? Just to allow our panelists to take the floor. I think that you come third. Yes, please. Oh.
Saved it. Thank you so much. My name is Lily. I'm from China, and I'm a policy analyst at IESALC. Thank you so much for the very inspiring conversation. I very much agree with the value-based approach for doing international cooperation. But I have some questions, like reflecting from me, myself, being a student back in the days. I'd like to share a personal story first. Sure. I was involved in a program called Semester at Sea. Through the program, I was able to travel to 14 countries within 107 days. And I remember when we were in South Africa, we visited the jail where Nelson Mandela stayed before. We were able to talk to the prisoners who stayed with him. We were able to talk to Desmond Tutu and really try to understand the values, the context of the country and this and that. But what I encountered going back from the program to my university in the US was I really had to justify to my department so that they understand that those programs brings more than just lectures. There are values attached to it. But the whole process of trying to justify and to really try to quantify something that's not so easily quantifiable is really a pain for students. And I believe I was not the only student who had the same struggle. So my question is, what kind of cooperation that can provide supporting mechanism to students for them to understand that mobility or international programs brings them more than just courses? And if those things are not reflected in solid indicators, what can we actually tell students to incentivize them to go out and see the world? So that's my first question. And so I have a very quick second question.
Okay, a quick one. Okay, go ahead.
Very quick one. The second question is in regards to industry. Students' life don't end after they finish university. What's next? They're gonna find a job, or maybe they're gonna be entrepreneurs, but whatever, they're gonna go into the real labor market. And what can industry play a role in the international cooperation area to actually make the value that students have gained through this experience to be transferred to realistic practices? We can't, pretend industries don't exist. And through all those conversations I heard, I didn't really hear how industries actually can be part of it to incentivize and for them to actually recognize all this international cooperation we try to provide at institutional, national, and international level. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite our panelists. Don't feel obliged. I mean, just if you wish to react to some of the. Okay. Pam, would you like? Yes.
When it comes to the recognition of certificates and diplomas and so on, I think that this is very. I mean, it is difficult. The recognizing. It is, what did I say? It's a mission for everyone to try to do their best to recognize what is in the credits from different parts of the world. We will never have a unified accreditation. That's hundreds of years in the forefront. So that's important that we all help. And then the top-down, I agree. Of course, and I said from the beginning, researchers finds researchers, and we should promote that. Rectors should not ask any researcher to cooperate, because that would not work. But they need the funding and they need the support for a long-standing cooperation, and they have to take a responsibility for the cooperation they are doing. So I completely agree when it comes to researchers. And then the recognition of experience. I'm sorry to say that this is what I hear from students also in Sweden. Students having studied abroad, and I said I don't recognize what I bring. And also the experience of having international traveling or being at different universities. This is really an obligation of the university to see too in their curricula that they recognize that this student has brought in something more into his or her knowledge base to be used, of course, for the future. And I think that all that experience is important for the sustainable development of societies. And the labor and the industries, they do not always recognize what you are bringing. On the other hand, I think that if we are collaborating a little bit more from the universities with the industries and talk about the values of this, maybe we can have cooperation between the South and North, where international industries are also involved in both parts. So there is a constant sharing of knowledge. And I know, for example, that companies like Volvo and so on has been exploring this, and they're looking into this. So there is hope that they will recognize this. And I think that when they employ one who has that experience, they will find out that this is a good candidate for the future.
Good point. Good point. Thank you very much. Oscar, please.
Bueno, más o menos.
Well, I think more or less similar, but with a few differences. I would share with our colleague from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and this is something that we also saw in the presentation with degrees, that within Latin America, and then, of course, in North-South relations as well, as I said at the beginning earlier today, we are looking at these barriers to mobility between our countries, and when we look at the quality certifications, which have allowed us to make some progress, I don't think we any longer have this excuse of differences, and we should be able to make much more rapid progress and have degrees directly accredited from one country to the next, and that is something that we must do. This is a fully shared principle. I also share the idea that I think we need to not just think about countries and international financing this way, but go back to a basic concept that what is the university, how can we internationalize it, look for funds which may exist internally and which perhaps is not such an enormous amount of money, and then look at partners. Sometimes I think we think about funding and then work in that direction and don't see things the other way around. I think that, first of all, we need to have a look for the funding and then see where we can get things done. And I think this is a strategy for the university. And then after that, see, on the basis of what we want to do, how we can fund it. And then if we can talk about the vision from China, to answer the question that was asked there, I think that, first of all, you have to see this university. Why is it thinking this? Why does it have to answer about its need to exist and do what it's doing? Perhaps it's not convinced about internationalization, because I think that one of the basis of the way of teaching and learning is based on real cases. And I hope that we would all be able to see, however many days, 14 countries, et cetera, But I think there doesn't just have to be a physical experience today. There could be a virtual experience and other things that would allow us to provide support and to simulate these things and see how they might work. But I think that we need to see what concept a university has of internationalization. If it's thought out in terms of the curriculum, if it's a quantity of hours that has to be respected, and then people would have to explain why. This isn't a strategy of the university explaining what internationalization is. And the same is true of industry. I think this is a fundamental importance. If something has to be clarified, we all know that anyone who is providing funding has financial interests which make them act the way they're acting. It's the case of countries, it's the case of economic sectors. So if we look at an industry which is providing funding with very specific motivations which might not coincide with the interests of the university. We're always looking at win-win situations. If a university does manage to win in professional education and it doesn't condition the form of training they're giving, but the industry is also convinced that this is of interest to them, we need to follow that path. We don't need to have the precondition that the industry's funding coincide exactly with the motivations of the university. The values of the university are such that we need to think that industry, basically business, just as you say, we are talking about, that people graduate and then the university tends to forget about the graduate. We need to think about the whole person who exists even after graduation and the possibilities the university is giving to that person in their society. And if we don't think about industry, about business, I think we will be losing sight of a very important part of the picture.
So 2, yes, 2, 3, okay, 4. Well, look, I have to ask you a question, okay? I've seen 4 people, yes, okay, but there is the inauguration ceremony, and because of security reasons, we have to go and move into the room as soon as possible. So if I can ask you to be as short as possible, I would really appreciate, and just to provide time also for our panelists to respond to your comments. So I've seen 1, 2, 3, and I'm missing, and 4. Okay, so yes, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. I think internationalization has to be viewed from different perspectives. Obviously, one of them is financial. For this event, UNESCO probably set aside 2 or 3 million euros. How much does a warplane or a Tomahawk missile cost? Millions of dollars or thousands. This conference has to ask nations to provide more funding for education, science, and culture. It's just untenable for them not to have a minimum level of resources. And now let's talk about COVID. Universities have played an important role in dealing with COVID, and some companies in the world have taken advantage of university-led research. And beyond the financial aspect, universities need to be more aggressive in a positive sense to cooperate amongst each other. I'm not so concerned about the North-South issue. I mean, I think we have common interests, north and the North and South, and then there are people who are on the same side who don't have a common interest. So I think it works either way. As to degree recognition, there are 4 countries in Latin America where universities represent countries, but they don't. Sorry, the speaker's microphone has stopped working. The speaker's microphone has stopped working. We're sorry, but we can't hear him well enough to interpret. So the fact that governments aren't doing things should be no excuse. Universities have to do their own thing. That's what university autonomy or independence is for. And finally, mobility in the world should really lead us to an alliance for transformation. Beyond 2030, the SDGs will be valid in 2040 or 2050. I mean, whether or not they're met by the deadline. From a funding standpoint, I really hope this conference will call upon the world to fund the SDGs. I think Pedro mentioned yesterday the need for multilateralism. We need international relations based on multilateralism. As Federico Mayor said, forget about all these, G7 groups and so forth. And about cooperation, I believe it was Pedro who mentioned yesterday that a lot of North-South cooperation actually, or funding actually remains in the North, about 70%. But, we have to, we can't just be talking about sustainability in terms of our own sustainability. It has to be all around.
Another request? No, it wasn't you? Okay, so the lady next to. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Eglis Chacon. I'm from the Institute of International Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean. And my question is more related with technology and technology shaping the international cooperation and enhance these synergies. Professor Alpa mentioned about the COVID, and I think the COVID gave us this big learning about the importance of international cooperation and global cooperation. In this sense, and honoring time, what do you think are the main strategies that higher education institutions can be collaboratively working in order to reach, for example, those communities, rural communities, which are usually those that are left behind? So what kind of initiative could you think that we could improve in order to promote different internationalization, but also using technology as a main tool?
Thank you. We have another participant here in the first row. First row. And then, yes. No, wait. First the lady. Oh, no, she was first. Yes, the lady was first.
So
actually, she was first. It's not a matter of... Yes, please.
So my name is Hannah Bounama. I'm from Mauritania. I'm the senior advisor for the international cooperation in the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. So actually, we have just finalized our higher education strategy in Mauritania, and with the help with the UNESCO Office of International Institutes for Educational Planning in Dakar, Senegal. But the issue that we are facing in Mauritania is that the stakeholders, international organizations, and etc. Are not focusing enough on higher education, but rather on elementary and secondary education. This is actually limiting the development of certain mechanisms in our higher education system and affecting not only simple things such as expanding the university capacity for enrolling students, but also to provide them with practical learning and support the research pool. So my question is how to adapt recommendations on how to build bridges for affecting higher education cooperation that will support universities in developing countries and the cooperation approach overall.
Thank you. Thank you. And now goes just 2 rows with Aha. Yes, please.
Álvaro Rico, Uruguay.
Álvaro Rico, Uruguay, of University of Montevideo. This is not a question, this is not my personal opinion either. There's just something I wanted to mention, quoting from a document that was drawn up collectively at a gathering of universities from Latin America and the Caribbean on this item, on this point. In the declaration of the Regional Conference on Higher Education held in 2018, held in Cordoba as a preparation for this World Conference, which was then postponed because of the pandemic, it is stated that this integration of our region is essential for the future of our continent. These regions, this region is multicultural and multilingual. So the tackling of the problems of its peoples require their own specificities in keeping with the wealth of a culture that of the peoples that it represents. And its approach needs to be based on solidarity and cooperation among peers with an emphasis on South-South cooperation. The Agenda 2030 under objectives under Goal 17 talks about building solid alliances to achieve the SDGs. This can lead to inclusive sustainable development through led processes, nation-led processes that are based on countries' own development plans and the alignment of national and international approaches. Then a series of issues and proposals are outlined, which I will spare you. Thank you very much. In any case, this document is available from the website of your association. Okay, great, wonderful.
Opportunity of last-minute reactions or your last, contribution. Okay.
Yeah, I think it would take time. To answer all the questions, but I would like to send a message, and that is we have not brought up, and that's concerning the involvement of governments. Governments is giving money, and if we won't have it as public good, I think it is important. But we have not talked about the values of the higher education, the fundamental values of the academic freedom, the solidarity, the equity. These values must be met. Then we can cooperate, but we have to stand up for these values all around the world, because that's the signal for the universities. And I think that I will stop there and say that some of the questions, there we have a lot of information at the IAU website they can look for internationalization, and also that the looking into the what is happening with the technology. There is a statement. There is a lot to say about technology, and we have to take advantage, but also see what do we lose with technology. So I will end up with the values of higher education, that we stick to them when we continue to talk about cooperation.
Thank you very much. Oscar, please.
Sí, para cerrar también, más que...
This is, again, also not a reply. Just to wind up, I mean, I agree on what you were saying. We have to talk about values. We need to make the purpose of the universities to be made clear. We need to continue to wage war against the commercialization of higher education, because that is something that goes against values. It's a completely different approach. And we need to ratify this particular take that higher education needs to have globally, because by having states take responsibility for this social good that is higher education and the input from universities on the values concerned, well, then internationalization will be part of the university, and then we will achieve all of the other things we want, sort of mutual recognition of degrees and so forth. And universities that can think in south-south terms and in north-south terms, and in terms of communities, of institutions, of industry, because this is crucial. If we want the kind of universities we want for 2030, and as our colleague said, 2040 and 2050 and beyond. In any case, we're building this agenda on a daily basis with our work, without forgetting what the ultimate goal is in terms of universities and human rights.
Reminding you that in the conference website, you can find supporting documents on this theme, in particular a background document on international cooperation, where the authors, coming from our institute, by the way, have proposed a number of principles that could inspire maybe the development of international cooperation in higher education in the next decade. And among other things, the document also suggests the need for having an international fund dedicated entirely to higher education, so addressing some of your concerns. It's just a proposal. We don't have the money yet, but I think that we need to work on that. We need to work on that. On the other hand, one of the participants reminded us that there is another session entirely devoted to the international aid in higher education. I strongly recommend you to attend that session, where you are going to see, and I'm confirming the data he was sharing, that 70% of what is called international aid in higher education is actually spent in the donor country. In the donor country, okay? You can engage in that discussion later on. And finally, it is also very important, allow me to be a bit, assertive in that, the Institute also has been instrumental in preparing a number of sessions on the universal right to higher education. So please, if you find the time, join us in this discussion. We need to see how we decline the meaning of internationally of the right to higher education for all. And finally, we have also been instrumental in preparing the discussion about financing higher education, which is really the test for the endorsement or not of the universal right to higher education. So if you believe that this is a right, then you have to pay for it. Okay, so it's going to be really, really a controversial session, and I can only invite you to be part of that. Thank you very much for your time. Don't leave without an applause to our panelists. Thank you very much, and now please go to the auditorium. Can I have a picture with you?